Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into the architecture behind the KubeRocketCI platform.
That's right. We've got the developer guide, the reference architecture docs, and the CI/CD pipeline description to work from.
Yeah, good stuff. And our mission really is to give you a solid, high-level picture of how KubeRocketCI is actually built.
Exactly. Think of it like understanding the blueprint, the key parts, and how they connect without getting totally swamped in, the deepest technical weeds.
We know a lot of you listening are technical DevOps folks, architects. So we're aiming to pull out the insights that matter for understanding that core structure.
Okay, so where do we start? The developer guide kicks things off talking about these fundamental architectural blueprints.
Right. It mentions this idea of an ecosystem built on these blueprints.
Yeah, and they do say detailed diagrams exist if you need that really granular view. But the main takeaway for us, I think, is how this structure allows you to plug in third-party tools.
So it's designed to be open, adaptable.
Absolutely. That modularity is really stressed. Makes it easier to customize, easier to evolve.
And how are these pieces, these components, actually packaged? The guide talks about Helm charts.
Mostly, yes. Helm charts, often with a Docker image inside. Or sometimes standalone Helm charts, or just Docker images. Pretty standard cloud-native packaging.
Got it. Containerized and managed via Helm.
Exactly. And importantly, they mention these are all regularly updated, so it's not a static thing.
And then there are those optional bits, the add-ons, Keycloak, Nexus operators.
Yeah, from separate repo, Edpluster add-ons.
Yeah.
You can install them independently if you need that specific functionality, like identity management with Keycloak or artifact storage with Nexus.
Keeps the core lean, but offers extensions. Makes sense.
Precisely. And that foundation, that modular approach, really paves the way for the bigger picture described in the reference architecture document.
Okay, so shifting to the reference architecture. This sounds like their philosophy, their recommended way of doing things for software delivery.
You could put it like that. It's the blueprint for, as they say, efficient and high-quality software delivery. And KubeRocketCI is built to embody these ideas.
And the central piece is Kubernetes, right?
Absolutely central. Using Kubernetes for container orchestration is highlighted right away. It gives that flexibility, run it in the cloud, run it on-prem.
So it's cloud agnostic. You're not locked into AWS or Azure or GCP specifically.
Exactly. A big plus for many organizations. Avoids lock-in, allows for hybrid or multi-cloud if that's your strategy.
What other guiding principles does the reference architecture lay out? Security seems prominent.
Oh, definitely. They talk about managed infrastructure, container orchestration, and then right alongside that, security, authentication, authorization, SSO. It's baked in.
Not an afterthought.
Not at all. And then there's a comprehensive tool set for development and testing naturally.
You'd expect that in a CI/CD platform.
Right. But they also link it to having a well-established engineering process. They mention EPAM's INGX methodology feeding into their CI/CD approach.
So it's not just tools, but also methodology.
Yeah, it's about embedding those practices. Plus, commitment to open source, a big focus on DevSecOps security as a mandatory gate, not optional.
Makes sense.
And automated testing naturally for solid regression testing. These principles really shape the whole platform.
Okay, principles clear. Now, how does this translate into the actual architecture overview from that same document?
Well, this is where Tekton and Argo CD come into sharp focus. They're presented as the core engine of the CI/CD ecosystem.
Tekton for the pipelines, Argo CD for deployment?
Basically, yes. Tekton handles the build, test, integration steps to the CI/CD workflow. Argo CD manages the deployment side, particularly using a GitOps approach.
And tools like SonarQube fit in there too.
Integrated for code quality checks, plus other SaaS tools for security scanning is all part of that automated flow.
And managing the outputs? Artifacts.
Yeah, they emphasize using proper artifact storage nexus, Artifactory, or cloud equivalents for securely managing and versioning everything that gets built. Traceability is key.
Okay. How do developers actually get into the system? Access control.
Good question. They push using corporate credentials via OIDC OpenID Connect.
Single sign-on, essentially.
Exactly. Often using Keycloak as an identity broker to connect to whatever identity provider the company already uses, like Azure AD or Okta. The Keycloak Operator add-on helps manage this.
Simplifies access across all the tools and clusters.
That's the goal. Secure, unified access.
And there's a central portal, the KubeRocketCI portal.
Right. It acts as the main entry point, the dashboard, for developers to access the different tools and components.
Can you start new projects from there?
You can. They talk about generating new code bases using application templates, They give examples: Java, Node.js, .NET, Python.
Standard starter kits.
Kinda, yeah. And you could apparently add custom ones via a marketplace. It standardizes how new projects get bootstrapped within the platform.
Interesting. So it helps the consistency right from the start. Let's circle back to Tekton. Cloud-native CI/CD reusable components.
That reusability is a big part of Tekton's design. You define tasks and pipelines, and these can be reused across different projects. Tekton triggers then automate starting these pipelines based on events, like a Git commit.
Efficient. And what about the codebase operator? What role does that play?
Think of it as the manager for your application's source code lifecycle within the platform. It handles things like creating the repo structure, setting up webhooks, maybe linking to Jira, managing versions, automating those connections.
So it keeps the code side integrated with the platform operations.
Precisely. And speaking of tools, while they promote cloud-agnostic options for storage, security, etc., they're also realistic.
How so?
They explicitly mention integrating with cloud provider managed services, if that makes sense for you, like using AWS Parameter Store for secrets, or Azure DevOps artifacts, or SonarCloud instead of a self-managed SonarQube.
Offers flexibility there too.
Yeah, it's pragmatic. Use what works best or what you already have.
Okay, deployment. The CD pipeline operator uses Tekton and Argo CD.
Right. The operator orchestrates the overall CD process. It might use Tekton to run certain pre-deployment tasks or checks, and then it leverages Argo CD for the actual synchronization of the application state in Kubernetes based on the Git configuration.
Argo CD being the GitOps tool.
Exactly. It continuously monitors your Git repo and the live state in Kubernetes and makes sure they match. They strongly recommend that GitOps model.
And they suggest a separate Argo CD for operational stuff, like platform add-ons.
Yeah, that was an interesting recommendation. Keep the deployment of the platform's own components separate from the deployment of the business applications. Better isolation and management.
Sensible. And for production environments, any specific advice?
Big emphasis on isolation. Dedicated Kubernetes clusters for production workloads. That's almost a given for security and resource management.
Standard practice, really.
And they strongly recommend a pull model for production deployments, meaning an Argo CD instance running inside the production cluster pulls the configuration and applies it, rather than something external pushing into production.
Adds another layer of security control.
Definitely. Prevents external systems from having direct push access to production.
Okay, so that covers the core architecture. What about the broader tech stack mentioned?
Well, it reinforces the environment: segregation, dev, test, UAT, prod, with prod being mandatory separate. And it mentions the supporting tools you'd expect around Kubernetes: Prometheus for monitoring,
Right.
OpenSearch, or similar, for logging, and OpenTelemetry for tracing. With options to connect to external systems too, observability is built in.
Crucial for running things in production. And Git integrations.
Supports the majors: GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, Jarrett. No real surprises there.
And OIDC again for security across the board.
Yeah, they circle back to that.
Yeah.
Unified authentication and authorization is a recurring theme.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the reference CI/CD pipeline itself. Just a high-level flow.
Sure, it's presented as the automated path from code to deployment. Starts obviously with the developer commit.
Then checks.
First, validating the commit message format, maybe checking for a linked issue tracker ID. Then the build stage, compiling, unit tests, pulling dependencies, generating the actual artifact.
Like a Docker image or a JR file.
Exactly. Then it flows into quality and security gates. SaaS static application security testing, often using SonarQube, and SCA software composition analysis, checking dependencies for vulnerabilities.
Vertical steps.
Absolutely. After those checks pass, the artifact gets published to the secure artifact repository like Nexus or perhaps AWS ECR.
And then deployment.
Right. Using Argo CD primarily, maybe Tekton for orchestration, deploying to the various environments, test, QA, staging. They also mention pushing test results to a system like Report Portal for visibility.
What about supply chain security? Tekton chains.
Yeah, they briefly mentioned Tekton chains for signing artifacts and generating provenance metadata like SLSA attestations. Adds that extra layer of trust and verifiability.
Seems comprehensive, and again, flexible on tools.
Very much so. They reiterate that you could swap out, say, Nexus for JFrog Artifactory or use SonarCloud instead of your own SonarQube server. The pattern is the key, not necessarily the specific tool brand.
Got it. So wrapping up, we've looked at the core architectural ideas, modular components, Kubernetes foundation, the importance of Tekton and Argo CD.
The guiding principles like security first, cloud agnostic design, and the flow of the reference CI/CD pipeline.
It paints a picture of a platform that's, well, pretty modern in its approach, built for flexibility and automation on Kubernetes.
Absolutely. The reference architecture really emphasizes that efficient delivery pipeline, leveraging GitOps and integrated security and quality checks.
And for everyone listening, if you want the really fine-grained details, definitely check out the links in the description. The developer guide, reference architecture docs, the pipeline description, they go much deeper.
Yeah, there's a lot more specifics in there, which actually brings up a point to maybe think about. Well, given how modular it is and how it aims to be cloud agnostic, how would you take this blueprint and really tailor it? Especially thinking about your own specific security rules or compliance needs. How would you leverage that flexibility?
That's a good question to ponder. Tailoring the blueprint to fit specific constraints.
Something to consider.
Indeed. Well, thanks for digging into this architecture with us today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. Until next time.